The night Vivienne Côté saved a man's life, she was carrying 2 plates of osso buco and trying not to think about her rent. That was the thing about working at Maison d'Orval. You learned fast to keep your mind on the food and your eyes off the guests, especially the ones who came in after 10, when the kitchen was winding down and the dining room felt like a different city. Quieter, heavier. The kind of quiet that had weight to it. Vivienne had been waiting tables at Maison d'Orval for 3 years. She knew the rhythm of the place the way she knew her own heartbeat. The way the floorboards near tables creaked, the way the sommelier, Francois, always refilled the wrong glass first when he was nervous. The way the back corner booth stayed empty until management got a call they didn't share with the staff. She was 26 years old, 5'4" and 260 pounds. She wore the same black uniform as the other servers, the stiff white collar, the apron tied double at the back because the standard tie didn't reach, and she moved through the dining room the way water moves through a complicated system of pipes, finding the path that worked, getting where she needed to go, making it look like the only way there ever was. She wasn't invisible exactly. People saw her, they just looked through her the second after, the way you look through glass at what's on the other side. She'd gotten used to it. The man in the back corner booth arrived at 10:47 on a Thursday in November. Vivienne noticed him the way she noticed most things, sideways, while doing something else. She was resetting table 3 when the door opened and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 2 degrees, not from the cold outside. From something else, something that moved in with him. His name, she would learn later, was Éric Renaud. She didn't know that yet. What she knew, in the way that servers develop a sixth sense for these things after enough years, was that he was someone, not celebrity Samion, not politician Samion, something older than that, something with fewer cameras and more consequences. He was tall, broad across the shoulders in a way that wasn't about the gym, it was just structure, the way some men are built like door frames. He had dark hair going silver at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been cut rather than grown, and eyes that were doing something she couldn't quite name. Not looking at the room. Reading it. He sat down without being shown to his seat. His 2 men sat at the bar without ordering. Vivienne picked up her notepad. She crossed the dining room and stood at the edge of the booth. "Good evening," she said. "Can I start you with something to drink?" He looked up at her. She had been looked at 1,000 different ways in that dining room. Looked through, looked past, looked at with the particular blankness of someone who's already decided you don't matter. She had developed a professional thickness of skin that she wore like a second uniform. Éric Renaud did not look at her like that. He looked at her the way you look at something you weren't expecting to see, not unkindly, like recalculation happening in real time. "Perrier," he said, "and the Chateau Pichon, 2014, if you have it." She wrote it down. "We do. I'll be right back." She went to the bar, gave Francois the wine order, and went about her work. The dining room was quieter than usual for a Thursday. 3 other tables occupied, a couple near the window celebrating something, 2 men in suits near the front who kept their voices down, an older woman dining alone with a paperback she kept folding face down whenever her phone buzzed. Vivienne moved between them all. She brought Éric Renaud his water and his wine. She poured correctly, not too much, stem held properly, the label facing him. She set the glass down without a sound. "Are you ready to order? Or would you like a few minutes?" "I'll have the duck," he said without looking at the menu. He'd been watching the room. "And tell me something." She paused, pen still hovering. "Of course. How long have you worked here?" It wasn't the question she expected. She answered it anyway. 3 years. You know the staff well then, reasonably, the bartender. He didn't gesture. His eyes stayed on her. How long has he been here? She thought about that. Thought about what the question might mean, and what might be behind it, and what she was supposed to say. and she thought about the fact that this man had 2 people at her bar, and neither of them had touched their drinks, and one of them had been watching the kitchen door for the last 4 minutes. "He started 6 months ago," she said. "Before that it was a woman named Chantal. She retired." Éric Renaud was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, small, careful. "Leave the wine," he said. "Don't pour it yet." She nodded. She didn't ask why. She walked back to the service station, and she did something she had never done in 3 years of working at Maison Dorval. She stopped. She stood still, she thought. The wine was a 2014 Pichon. She'd pulled it herself from the cellar because François had been on the floor. She'd brought it up, set it on the bar, and turned away for maybe 90 seconds while François uncorked it and poured. 90 seconds. She looked at the bottle on the table. Then she looked at François, who was now wiping down the bar with his back to the room. Then she looked at the 2 men sitting at the bar. One of them had shifted on his stool. Not much, just slightly, so that his jacket fell open on the left side. Vivienne had grown up in Hochelaga Maisonneuve. She had 3 brothers. She knew what the weight of something in a shoulder holster did to the way a jacket hung. She stood at the service station for one more moment. Then she picked up a clean glass, walked to the bar and said to François, quietly, conversationally, "The Pichon at corner booth, can you pour me a taste? I want to check it before I serve it. I think it might have turned." François looked at her. She looked back at him. He was new, 6 months new, and she'd always found him a bit too smooth for a restaurant like this, too careful, too precise, like someone who'd learned what to say by studying for it. Good at his job in the specific way that meant he'd prepared rather than grown into it. He poured her a taste from a different bottle, the same label, uncorked already. She thanked him. She walked back toward the booth. She stopped at the service door, flagged down Thomas, the floor manager, and said, "Don't let anyone touch the bottle on corner booth, and call Monsieur Arsenault." Thomas stared at her. "Vivienne now," she said, "please." She kept moving. She set the clean glass at Éric Renaud's right hand. She uncorked a fresh bottle, the one she'd personally retrieved, and she poured. He watched her do it. Watched her hands, watched her face. "There was something wrong with the first pour," she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. "I replaced the bottle. I'd suggest waiting until your people check it before you drink." She straightened. She tucked her notepad under her arm. "Your duck will be ready in about 12 minutes, she said. "Can I bring you some bread while you wait?" Éric Renaud looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." She went to get the bread. The rest of the night moved fast and then slow and then fast again. She didn't see exactly what happened near the bar. She was in the kitchen when she heard the change in the sound of the room. Not an argument, not a crash, just a shift, the way a piece of music shifts key. When she came back out with a bread basket, the 2 men from the bar were no longer there. François was no longer there. 2 different men, ones she'd never seen, stood near the entrance, speaking quietly with Thomas. Corner booth was still occupied. Éric Renaud was eating his duck. He finished his meal. He had coffee. She brought it herself, checked the cup, made the cup in front of him from a machine only she used that night. He didn't comment on any of it. When she brought his bill, he looked at it without picking it up. "Sit down," he said. She looked around the dining room. It was nearly empty now. The couple by the window had gone. The men in suits, the woman with the paperback. She sat. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at the room all night, like reading. "You noticed the bottle," he said. "The timing was off," she said. "François was behind the bar when I brought it up. I was only gone a minute and a half. Most people wouldn't have caught it. Most people aren't watching the same things I watch." He was quiet. "What are you watching?" She thought about how to answer that. She thought about what was true and what was safe, and whether in this situation those were the same thing. "Everything that doesn't fit," she said. "The way your men weren't drinking. The way François was standing. He had his back turned, but his weight was forward. He was listening for something. And the way you asked about him specifically. She paused. You already knew something was wrong. You wanted to know if I did too. Éric Renaud was very still. You're very observant, he said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was a statement, the way you'd state a fact about terrain. Useful, noted, filed. It's a useful thing to be, she said, when everyone's too busy looking past you to care what you see. Something moved in his expression. Just briefly, like a door opening and closing. Your name, he said, Vivienne Côté. He repeated it once, quietly, like he was storing it somewhere specific. How much do they pay you here, Vivienne? She told him. She watched him not react to it in a way that told her he found it insulting. Would you like to make more? She looked at him steadily. Doing what? Working for me, he said. Not this. A small gesture at the restaurant around them. I have a building, an office. I need someone who watches things the way you watch things. He picked up his coffee cup. Someone I can trust with my back to the room. She sat with that for a moment. She turned it over, the way she turned over everything, looking for the angle, the weight, what was on the other side. I need to think about it, she said. He nodded. He didn't push. He left her a business card and a tip that was larger than most people's rent checks. She stood at the table after he was gone and looked at the card for a long time. The name on it said Renaud Group. Below that, a phone number. Nothing else. She thought about her apartment on Rue Ontario. The water that came out brown for the first 30 seconds every morning. The heating that worked 3 weeks out of 4 if she was lucky. The way she'd been $300 short last month and had eaten mostly eggs and toast for 10 days and told no one. She thought about 3 years of carrying plates through a room where no one saw her. She put the card in her apron pocket and finished her closing tasks. She called the number 8 days later. The office of the Renaud Group occupied the top 2 floors of a glass building on Saint-Jacques Street, the kind of building that didn't advertise its tenants and had security that noticed you before you noticed it. Vivienne walked in on a Monday morning in November wearing her good coat, the only good coat she owned, a deep burgundy wool thing she'd bought second-hand from a shop on Mont Royal, and she told the man at the desk her name. He picked up a phone, said 3 words. Hung up. 14th floor, he said. The office was not what she expected. She'd expected something cold, chrome and glass, and the particular aesthetic of power that wants you to feel small. What she found instead was something more like a serious room. Bookshelves that were actually used, a long oak table with papers spread across it, windows that looked out over the St. Lawrence, low enough in the sky that you could see the water without craning. Éric Renaud was standing at the windows when she came in. He turned. You came, he said. I said I'd think about it, she said. I thought about it. He almost smiled, not quite. Sit down. She sat across the table from him and listened while he explained, in precise, careful language, what the position involved. She would work directly with him. She would be present at certain meetings. She would observe. She would tell him what she saw. You won't be taking notes, he said. You won't be making decisions, you'll be watching. And at the end of each day, you'll tell me what you noticed. And if I notice something that makes me uncomfortable, she said. He looked at her directly. Then you tell me that too. She looked at him for a moment. What happened to Francois? He's no longer a concern. She understood that this could mean several things. She chose to understand it as the least permanent version. All right, she said. I'll need a week's notice at the restaurant. Of course. She stood. He stood. One more question, she said. Why me? You could hire someone with training. Surveillance background. Security. Éric Renaud looked at her the way he'd looked at her the first night, that recalculating look, the one that wasn't dismissal. I have people with training, he said. What I needed was someone who watches the room differently, someone no one thinks to watch back. He paused. You moved through that dining room for 3 years and not one person in it. Not my men, not the man they sent, ever thought to pay attention to what you were seeing. He said it simply, not as a compliment to her invisibility, as an indictment of everyone else's blindness. She thought about every night she'd spent in that dining room, every conversation she'd caught the edge of, every tell she'd clocked in a guest's face, every small wrong thing she'd filed away without knowing why. "All right," she said. "I'll start Monday after next." She gave her notice at Maison Dorval that afternoon. Thomas looked at her with something that might have been worry and might have been relief, and didn't ask questions. She started on a Monday. The first weeks were quieter than she expected. She sat in the back of rooms. She listened to conversations conducted half in French, half in a kind of coded shorthand she had to learn by context. She watched Éric Renaud manage men, the way he listened more than he spoke, the way his silences did work that other people's words couldn't, the way his attention landed on someone, and that person felt it and stood up straighter or sat down or occasionally left the room. She took no notes during. At the end of each day, she sat across from him and told him what she'd seen. "The one on the left, Fernand. He's lying about the port accounts," she said one evening. "Not dramatically, just trimming. The way he pauses before numbers and then talks faster after. And he touched his collar 3 times when you mentioned the auditor." Éric looked at her. "You're sure?" "I'm not sure about anything," she said. "I'm telling you what I saw." He had the accounts reviewed. Fernand was no longer present at meetings after the 3rd week of December. No one said anything directly to Vivienne about it. But she noticed that the men who'd been loudest in the beginning, the ones who'd spoken over her in the hallway, the ones who'd looked through her the way the restaurant guests had, they started glancing at her differently. Not with warmth, with something more useful than warmth. Caution. She didn't mind caution. She had been at the Renaud group for 6 weeks when she noticed the first thing that truly frightened her. It was at a dinner, a private one, at a house in Outremont, a stone place behind iron gates that felt like it belonged to a different century. She sat near the far end of a long table. The dinner was in honor of some agreement she hadn't been briefed on. She ate quietly, watched the room, and said very little. It was near the end of the evening, while the table was splitting into smaller conversations over brandy, that she saw it. A man named Victor Lanoux. She'd been introduced to him once, briefly, as one of Eric's oldest associates. Slipped a phone from his jacket pocket, typed something short, and put it away. Small gesture, nothing remarkable. What was remarkable was who he looked at immediately after. Not at his phone, not at his brandy, at Éric. She knew that look. She'd seen it across 100 dinner tables in different versions. It was the look of someone checking to make sure the subject of a message hadn't seen them send it. She filed it, said nothing at the table. Later, in the car, she'd been given a car for the first time, a driver she didn't know, which she was still adjusting to. She turned the image over in her mind. Victor Lanoux, 22 years with the organization, godfather to one of Eric's nephews. A man whose loyalty was considered, as far as she'd been able to determine, foundational. She thought about Francois, about timing, about the space of 90 seconds. When she arrived at the office the next morning, Éric was already there, jacket off, working through papers. She sat down across from him without being asked. "Tell me about Victor Lanoux," she said. He looked up slowly. "What about him? Last night, at the dinner, he sent a message from the table. Then he checked on you, the way you check on someone when you've just sent a message about them." Éric was quiet. His face was very still in a way she'd come to understand meant the stillness was costing him something. "You're certain? I'm telling you what I saw," she said. "Same as always." He set down his pen. He looked at the window. He looked back at her. "Victor has been with me since before I had this office," he said. "I know. He's attended my mother's funeral, my daughter's baptism. I know." He was quiet for a long moment. "What did you see exactly?" he said. "Walk me through it." She did. She was precise. She didn't editorialize, didn't interpret, just told him the sequence, the phone, the movement, the look, the timing. She told him what she'd noticed about Lanu throughout the dinner, the small details she hadn't thought to mention until now. The way he'd steered the conversation away from the port contracts twice. The way he'd laughed at a joke a half-second after everyone else, like he was watching for his cue. When she finished, Éric was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. It took her a moment to name it. Trust, the kind that is earned through something that hurt. "All right," he said. "Don't say anything to anyone." "I need 3 days." She nodded. She went back to work. For 3 days she moved through the office and said nothing. She watched Victor Lanu the way she'd learned to watch everything, sideways while doing something else, and she noticed that he was doing something she recognized. He was performing normalcy, just slightly too well. The casual jokes at the right volume, the easy check-ins with colleagues, the way he stopped to ask her about her weekend with an openness that was a fraction too broad. She answered his questions pleasantly. She told him her weekend was fine. She watched him walk away and thought, "You're working very hard at this." On the 4th day, she arrived at the office to find it quiet, unusually quiet. Lanu's office was empty. 2 men she'd seen only peripherally were moving through the floor, speaking to no one. Éric called her into his office at noon. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, which, she thought, he probably hadn't. He sat behind his desk. She sat across from him. "Victor was passing information," he said, "for 8 months. To a group out of Toronto." He paused. The dinner was the transfer point for something larger. She absorbed that. "Did you? It's handled." He said it the same way he'd said it about François, and she chose the same understanding. He looked at her across the desk. There was something in his face, not soft exactly, but opened slightly, like something that usually kept itself sealed, had allowed the seal to loosen just enough. "2 times now," he said. "You've told me something I didn't want to know. 2 times it was right. I just told you what I saw." "Yes," he was quiet. "Most people see what they want to see, or what they're told to see." He paused. "You see what's there?" She looked back at him. She was aware, in a way she hadn't quite allowed herself to be before, of what was in the room. Not just the information they'd exchanged, the useful professional trust. Something else. Something she'd been careful not to look at directly since the first night, when he'd looked at her like she was something he hadn't expected. "Éric," she said. It was the first time she'd used his first name. They both noticed. "There's going to be a next time," she said. "Maybe not Lanu, maybe not the same shape, but there's going to be a next time, and it's going to come from somewhere close to you, because that's how it works." He nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "So you need to decide," she said, "whether I'm someone you keep around until this job changes what I am, or whether you actually want someone at your back who's going to keep telling you what they see." He looked at her for a long moment. "I need someone who tells me what they see," he said. "I don't have many of those." "No," she said. "I expect you don't." She stood to leave. "Vivienne." She stopped. He was standing too on the other side of the desk, and he looked for just a moment like a man rather than a position, less architecture, more person. "The first night," he said, "at Maison d'Orval, when you noticed the bottle." He paused. "What made you act? You didn't know me, you had nothing to gain." She thought about it. She thought about what was honest. "The timing was wrong," she said, "and I don't like things that don't fit." She paused. "Also, I'd been invisible in that dining room for 3 years. I was very good at it. And I thought, if I'm going to be invisible, I should at least be useful." Something changed in his face, not quite a smile. Something that lived a little deeper than that. "You were never invisible," he said. "You were unseen. There's a difference." She stood with that for a moment. Then she nodded, picked up her coat, walked to the door. "I'll see you tomorrow, Éric." "Tomorrow," he said. She walked through the office, past the long windows and the saint. Lawrence below them, and down to the street where the December air hit her face cold and clean, and she thought about those two words, unseen and invisible, and the precise distance between them, and how much of her life she had spent in one when she was always meant to be in the other. She buttoned her coat. She walked to the metro. She thought about tomorrow.